Native American history has become intertwined with U.S. history. One of the darkest chapters of this shared history is the Indian boarding school period that began in the late 1800s. For over 100 years, Native American children were taken from their homes and tribal communities and placed in boarding schools. Often the Native children were relocated hundreds and sometimes thousands of miles from their families for a long period of time. The practice of placing Native children in boarding schools became a policy of the U.S. government as a means to assimilate them. The goal was to take the Indian out of the children in hopes to Americanize them. But the objective was to erase and replace Indian culture. The mantra was, "Kill the Indian, save the man." It is estimated that up to 500,000 Native American children were removed from their families and placed in boarding schools, although the actual number may never be known. In 1928, the U.S. government released the Miriam Report that described substandard living conditions at Indian boarding schools in 26 states. The report revealed overcrowding, poor nutrition, and lack of proper medical treatment. Even with the Miriam Report's dismal findings, Indian boarding schools existed decades later with only limited improvements. There are still active boarding schools operating in the United States today. Many Native Americans, for multiple generations, have lived with the trauma associated with the Indian boarding school experience. Too often, that trauma has led to alcoholism, drug abuse, high rates of divorce, and suicide. Various Indian boarding schools have graveyards that contain the remains of Native children who died while attending the schools. There is a movement to have the remains returned. During the summer of 2021, the remains of 9 children were returned to the Rosebud Sioux tribe from Carlisle Indian Boarding School. That same summer, the world became aware of the legacy of boarding schools when the graves with the remains of 215 school children were found at the Kamloops Industrial Residential School in British Columbia, Canada. The discovery led U.S. Interior Secretary Deb Haaland to establish a federal Indian boarding school initiative.
We must shed light on the unspoken traumas of the past, no matter how hard it will be.
The initiative will include an investigation to identify past boarding schools, the location of known and possible burial sites, and the identities and tribal affiliations of the children who were taken there. Throughout the summer, more graves at other residential schools were disclosed. Tribal communities throughout the United States began to take action towards healing by holding talking circles, rallies, and marches. But healing does not occur with a one-time event, but is a long journey. All of Indian country is waiting for the results of the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative's findings, which are due in a report to Secretary Haaland by April 1st, 2022. Welcome. This is the second in a 3-part series of webinar discussions looking at the issue of boarding schools. My name is Valerie Vandepan, and I am the managing editor of Native News Online and one of the hosts of this discussion. Today we are discussing why repatriation is important. First, Native News Online would like to thank our sponsors, Platinum presenting sponsors, Tunica Biloxi Tribe of Louisiana, Gold sponsor, Yahoo, and Silver sponsor, Prairie Band Potawatomi, and Bronze sponsor, Bois Forte Tribal Government. Thank you for joining us. First, let's hear from Levi Rickert, our publisher and editor.
Good afternoon, Valerie, and good afternoon to the viewers out there. Good afternoon. I want to say Chi McGwitch for joining today's pertinent discussion on boarding schools, why repatriation is important. Today's live stream is only a part of Native News Online's commitment to cover the Indian boarding school issue. Since last year's discovery at the Camp Loops, the disclosure of 215 unmarked graves in British Columbia, Native News Online has increased its boarding school coverage. Repatriation is an important step towards healing. Our hope is that this generation is the generation that begins that long healing process from the scars of the failed assimilation policy known as Indian boarding schools. Native News Online seeks to do its part in this critical work. Back to you, Valerie.
Thank you, Levi. We again thank our platinum presenting sponsor, Tunica Biloxi Tribe of Louisiana. If you're just joining us again, welcome to the second of a three-part series of webinar discussions looking at the issue of Indian boarding schools. Today, we're discussing why repatriation is important. My name is Valerie Vandepan, and I am the managing editor of Native News Online. To get us started in this discussion, Deb Parker will introduce us to the subject. Deb is the Chief Executive Officer of the Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition, or NABS, where she brings almost 2 decades of experience on reckoning with the history of boarding schools, including serving as the Executive Director of Residential School Healing in Canada. Deb, thank you for joining us today. To get us started, what are you hearing from families, and how does the legislation you're advocating for address the families' needs?
Well, Halslahel, good afternoon. Sitsayaltsa Sitsa. My traditional name is Sitsayaltsa. It's an honor to be joining you here today. I'm the CEO of the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. And, I've been really in our traditional way, before we speak, we pray about the words that are needed to be said. And as I think of repatriation, and as we look at what's happened in Canada and what's happening here in the United States on our traditional lands, it was really reflective this weekend, thinking about the mothers and the fathers and the aunties and the uncles and all of the children who attended boarding school, and the cries, the tears for the children who wanted just to be home, to celebrate their lives and to live in the way that we're meant to be through our traditions and our culture, and how today we're fighting back to not only bring our children home, but to just to be whole again, just to be one with our ceremonies, to be one with the earth, to be one with each other. And so with these relationships, we think about, we feel there's been so much trauma and so much hurt and pain that has been inflicted upon our communities. I'm a member of the Tulalip tribes. I've served on council and I've worked in education. And so I feel in this position, this is the next step. This is the next place of healing. This is the next place that we need to bring justice to our children. And some folks ask, why now? Well, now our elders, they're older. Once our little ones were attending school, and those who made it out went home. And what did they go home to? Well, some of us don't know that answer. We haven't heard those stories. For some of us, we wonder where our relatives went to. For many of the children didn't return home. And so these family members, they're wondering, where are our children? And the federal government, the churches, and others who are a part of the taking of our children need to speak the truth. They need to open up their hearts and their minds and be willing to admit to the wrongs. This, as we know, is cultural genocide. This was the attempt to wipe out a people. And for many children, they didn't return. They're buried somewhere. Some were fostered out. And I know we'll hear from others this afternoon. So our families deserve to know what happened to their children. And it is time right now that we share that truth. It's time that we share in the healing. It's time that we create space for those children who are now elders, for them to tell their story. It is time that we listen. It is time that we support legislation that addresses these atrocities. It's important that we support efforts of repatriation, which is not only a physical process, but it's also a spiritual ceremony that will bring peace to our ancestors and healing to our communities. It's especially critical that the repatriations of children from boarding school sites, that they comply with NAGPRA. And we support the current efforts to strengthen NAGPRA in order to improve its implementation. We believe the revisions being considered need to clarify that the application of NAGPRA should apply not only to Indian boarding school properties that are on federal or tribal land, but also where a boarding school was provided in any amount of federal funding, resources, government, certifications, or permissions at any period of time, regardless of tribal ownership. And for years, NABS has been working to reveal the truth about Indian boarding schools in the US. But if there's anything we've learned over this past, it's that there's still so much to uncover. As we watch what is happening this year with the searches in Canada, we know that the same is happening here, and it will continue to happen. We must locate, identify, and protect the graves of our children here. In this country, we must face the truth of what happened in these boarding schools. We look forward to sharing more of the work being done in collaboration with the Department of Interior's Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative. NABS has an MOU with the Interior, so we've been meeting weekly, if not daily. And through our collaborative efforts, we know that the vast scope of boarding school records will require much more time to fully analyze and understand. This is truly the beginning. And that is why we continue to advocate also for the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding School Policies in the U.S. Act, which is H.R. 5444 and Senate Bill 2907, which was introduced in Congress last September 30th on the National Day of Remembrance for U.S. Indian Boarding Schools. We'd like to thank Senator Elizabeth Warren for introducing the bill. This bill now has bipartisan support in both the Senate and the House of Representatives, over 20 co-sponsors in the Senate, and over 51 co-sponsors in the House of Representatives. We believe establishing a congressional commission would be the most complete way to address the legacy of Indian boarding schools. It will provide an accounting of the number of children forced to attend these schools, the number of children who died or went missing while at these schools, and the long-term impacts for the children and families forced to attend. It would also provide the recording and preservation of testimony from survivors still alive today. We'd also ask that the recommendations for the restoration of culture and language be made available, and access to trauma-informed resources for individuals and communities be made available as well through this commission. Through a more thorough analysis of available records and hearing directly from survivors, we hope that a commission would lead to the opportunity for more repatriations, more children return to their homelands and their relatives. We have seen the healing power of the beautiful reparation ceremonies that have taken place at Carlisle, some of which we will hear about today from incredible Native women leading these efforts. We have hope for intergenerational healing, and we know that we must bring our children home. And these are important pieces of why we must bring our children home. But also, we send a lot of blessings to the families who are opening these doors and having these conversations, because it directly impacts their lives and their children's lives. And as long as we continue to heal together, there is so much hope for the future for our children. I have 3 beautiful children, and they're learning each and every day about the boarding school and the impacts of boarding school. And much of the information is new to us. And on April 1st, as we deliver some of the information that some of the research that we've been working on with the Interior, it will be another time for us to have these conversations with our children, with our neighbors, with our tribal leaders, because this is a moment where we need to all stand together. This is a moment where we can extend our prayers, we can extend our songs, we can speak our language, and we can become as powerful as we're needing to be. And when I say powerful, it doesn't mean above anyone else. It means that we share this space, we share this sacred land with one another, and that we'll be here to partake and to honor the earth and honor one another. And so for us, repatriations is such a big part of that. We deserve to know the truth, and it's time. It's time to know this truth. It's time to heal together, and it's time to reconnect with our loved ones and our ancestors. And so we thank you for this time, Native News Online. Thank you for allowing us this moment to be together and for our loved ones to come home. So in this we pray, Uti Gwitsi Chol, thanking you.
Deb, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing all of that, and thank you for letting us know about your legislation. For those of you watching, the links to the bills that Deb is talking about have been posted in the feed. If you'd like to learn more about them and take action on them, please do so. Thank you again if you're just joining us.
Hey, Deb.
Yes.
Hey, sorry.
Yeah.
I do have a question. Can you talk about the reality of what's going to happen with the report in April? You just basically said that it's going to take more time. We're going to need a commission. So can you kind of give our viewers a feel for what they can really expect?
Well, at this time, we have done an incredible amount of research, and the Interior has been a good partner with NABS. And so on April 1st, we can expect to hear what that research, where it's taken us. And I'm not at liberty to give details right now per our MOU, but you can expect some really groundbreaking information, and as it pertains to boarding schools and boarding school locations. And so the research staff has uncovered an enormous amount of information. And so the numbers of boarding schools that we had originally researched and understood, there's more. And so some of those hidden details will be released to the public on April 1st. So we look forward to that day, because that's going to be another day of healing, another step for us.
Well, thank you. And just about a week ago, we did a story that the governor of Michigan has put into a one-time appropriation in the state budget for a study of the Indian boarding schools, and there were like 3 here in the state of Michigan. So with that, I live in Michigan. Are there other states that you see similar initiatives taking place?
Yeah, I know, like Seattle, they have looked into working forward with, let's see, Deb Juarez, Councilwoman Deb Juarez.
Mm-hmm.
She is looking forward to possibly doing a commission on Indian boarding schools so they can examine what happened in the state of Washington and in the Seattle area. And so there's, as we move forward, I think that the need for truth and reconciliation and the need for information so that we can understand the true history. I believe that folks will come out and start to work within their own city councils, tribal councils, and that it'll spread because it needs to, it has to. It's time.
Well, McWitch, thank you. Back to you, Valerie.
Thank you so much. If you're just joining us, you're watching the News Online Indian Boarding Schools discussion. Today, we're talking about why repatriation is important. Before we move on, I'd like to thank our sponsors again, Platinum presenting sponsor, Tunica Biloxi Tribe of Louisiana, and our gold sponsor, Yahoo. Our second discussion is about finding the children. Eleanor Haddon is joining us. She is Chinket, Haida, and Tsimshian. And forgive me if I mispronounce any of those tribal names. Eleanor is the grandniece of Mary Kinnanook. Mary is among the 14 unknowns buried at Carlisle Industrial School. For more than 6 decades, Eleanor has worked along with her late mother, researching and trying to find Mary's location. Her hopes and her family's hopes are to one day repatriate Mary, but that hasn't happened yet after 6 decades. Eleanor, can you please talk with us about your journey finding your aunt?
Excuse me. It's been a long journey. Mom started looking, well, my mother's mother said to her one day, Sister Mary went to school someplace and she died there. And that's all she said. And Mom took it upon herself to try to find Mary. And she wrote to Chimawa first. And Chimawa didn't have a record of Mary, but she had a record of Grandma and her younger sister and her older brother. So that information sat with Mom for a while, and I don't know when she found out that maybe we should check Carlisle. But my husband and I and children stopped at Carlisle on one of our trips, and Mom said, stop in to see if you can find some information on Mary. So we went cold off the street into the archives of Carlisle. It's the Army War College now. And they didn't find anything. And they said, they pulled out a drawer of pictures of children, individual children, not group shots, but individual children. And it was probably about 2 to 3 inches deep of the single pictures of children. And she said, do you think you could find your aunt? And I told her, I don't even know what my grandmother looked like as a little girl. I don't know that I could find my great aunt. And so we let it go at that. And then I had to call Mom that night to tell her we couldn't find anything. And for the first time, it felt like we had just lost her because we couldn't find her. And then eventually Mom gets involved and talks with an anthropologist at University of Pennsylvania and Barbara Landis, a historian in Carlisle. And it took them a long time to find a piece of paper that they weren't sure Mary was even there. And they kept asking her, are you sure she came here? And Mom said to them, why would my mother make up such a story? And so they continued to look, and they eventually found the notice of her hospitalization and that she was sick. And then it had date of death on it. And so we finally got that. Then Mom was trying to figure out how to paper-wise leave a trail for Mary. Because she died at Carlisle, there was no record of her in Pennsylvania as a child who died. Because she wasn't living in Alaska, there was no record of her death in Alaska. So Mom finally got them to talking to get some type of recognition that Mary had lived and that had died in Pennsylvania. It was a deed of a deed of death or some wording that Mary did live and Mary did die in Pennsylvania. We went in 2000 to Carlisle, and that was when the county wanted to recognize the fact that the experiment didn't work. So Mom had been working on this for all these years, and she was ahead of her time. She wanted people to know about this, but at that time, 50 years ago, no one was ready to hear what happened to us. So she's no longer with us, and as she got older and got not able to travel, I picked up her work, and I've been trying to get the word out that, you know, Mary is in an unknown spot in Carlisle. Supposedly this summer, we're going to have the reinterment, or disinterment is what they call it. They're going to try to find Mary. We've met with the Army several times, but we've not heard specifically that it will be this summer yet.
I have a two-part question. One
Yes.
is, why would the Army not be able to give a date or a time for actually disinterring your aunt or any of the children who are unknowns to return them? And then can you talk a little bit about why it's so important? I feel like that question should go without saying, but I think it's important that we also say it, why this is so important.
Well, they were supposed to do the disinterment of Mary 2 years ago, but COVID hit, and so they postponed it for, they moved everything back a year. So last year they did some of the, I believe it was the Lakota and a little Aleut girl. So that pushed us into this summer. But we've not heard from them specifically as to when they're going to do this and what the process is. We've got a vague idea, but we just need to contact them to say what's going on, what are your plans, because we need to make the plans as well. Mom had always, for some reason, needed to know where Grandma's siblings were. Her Grandma's youngest brother was sent to Chemawa, and they noticed that he had TB, so they sent him to Lapwai, to the sanitarium there, and that's where he died, and he's buried there. So Mom wanted to make contact and find out where her aunt and uncle were, that the family felt missing. There was something missing in the family that we didn't know where they were, and we just needed to know that they were there somewhere and to bring them home, to kind of fill that missing part of our family. Is, I think, the reason we need to bring them home, is that, she was there. She did have her older brother with her when she died, but in the 5 years that she was gone, her mother and 2 other siblings had died, so it was an extremely difficult time for my grandmother.
Thank you for sharing about that journey with us. What are the next steps for you, and what are the plans with the Army? If they come through, if they don't come through, what's the plan?
Well, we really hadn't discussed much of a plan. Mom was going to be working on that, and she left us in July of 2021. So, and with the pandemic, we really didn't have a whole lot of time to work on that particular situation. Back in my mind, it was going to be a nice, quiet little gathering, but this affected more than just our particular family. It affected our whole clan. Nobody in the family lives in Ketchikan area anymore, and so we've got to figure out, where do we bring Mary? Her father is buried on Annette Island, which is a Native reserve, not a reservation, something to do with the politics. And so this is what we need to work on is, let the rest of the tribe know that we're bringing her home and have some kind of welcome home ceremony.
So I think it's important to note, and you can maybe speak to this, Eleanor, repatriation is a new concept. It's not, this
Right.
isn't something that we've been doing for thousands of years or even centuries. This is something very new, I think, for all of us. Can you speak a little bit to that newness? And if not, that's okay.
Well, they couldn't send the children home at that time because of the situation. It's a long way from home. It takes days to get here. And to leave her there, it just, inside here, doesn't feel right that we leave her there. So I think regardless of what the words are used, but to return her to her family and to her home.
Thank you, Eleanor. And thank you, Eleanor, and thank you to your Aunt Mary, who's so patient.
Patiently waiting.
So if you're just joining us, you're joining the Native News Online Indian boarding school discussion. This is the second in a 3-part series looking at the issue of Indian boarding schools. My name is Valerie Vandepan, and I am the managing editor of Native News Online. Before we move on, I'd like to thank our sponsor, our platinum presenting sponsor, Tunica Biloxi Tribe of Louisiana. We were going to have Yufna Soldier Wolf join us today, but she cannot join us today. She has been called to Cheyenne, Wyoming to testify there. So we wish her well in that testimony and hope that it's beneficial for everybody for her to speak there today. We're going to move on to our final portion of the discussion. And since we'll have a little bit of time at the end, we will have time for questions and answers. So if you have questions from what you've already heard over the previous half hour or going forward, please definitely type your questions into the comment section, and we'll try to get as many of those answered at the end of this program as possible. Our final discussion is about processing the experience of repatriation. I want to be very careful here about using the word healing, although certainly I think healing is something that we all need, both in the context of this discussion, but beyond as well. Sandy Whitehawk is joining us now. Sandy is Sichangu Lakota. She is an adoptee from Rosebud, South Dakota. She's the founder and director of First Nations Repatriation Institute. She has done extensive work with healing, organizing truth, healing, and reconciliation community forums. She's served as a commissioner for the Maine Wabanaki State Child Welfare Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And she served as an honorary witness of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission on residential schools in Canada. And she is also the president of the board of directors of the Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. Sandy, can you join us on screen? There she is. Hi, Sandy. Thank you so much.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you for joining us. I know that's quite the introduction, and you're following on the heels of quite a conversation. It's really heavy, and it's really sad talking about these things, and it's very painful to both experience it and to feel it. It's painful. What have you learned from your experience bringing community forums like these together?
Well, first I want to say thank you very, very much for trusting me with these few minutes to discuss this. And I want to say Pektuashte to all of our people in cyberspace watching us today. I said good day. Back in, was it when did we start this? 2006, my small nonprofit First Nations Repatriation Institute held its first Truth, Healing, Reconciliation Community Forum. One of the things that I knew as an adoptee and returning was that this process that I went through needed to, as I didn't know I needed to talk about it, and I pretty much didn't want to talk about it. But elders had always encouraged me over time. When I was first meeting Indian people back in 1988, they always encouraged me to talk and to tell them what happened to me. And many times when I would do that, they would offer me sage or sweetgrass. They would encourage me, and it validated to me that I was not first making up how I felt different. And it just built me up and gave me a healing and encouragement. But I didn't have words for any of this as it was happening. It wasn't until much later, as I started seeing so many adoptees and those who grew up in foster care not have that. And I also started finding out that many of us were children of boarding school survivors, and that they were children of boarding school survivors. So there was this connect. So in hopes to educate those who make decisions about children today in child welfare, and knowing that the majority of cases that come into child welfare, a family member, immediate parent or grandparent has had that boarding school experience. So we know that there's been a disruption in their family, and most likely not addressed, not healed. So I knew that I just took my experience and from meeting with the beautiful people that I'd met in the Wisconsin Indians where I lived, and used our circle. And it's a longer story, but we have everything that we need to have a center and to use that for healing purpose. And after doing several of those, probably about 16 to 20 of them, that's right about the time I got asked to participate in Maine's commission and in Canada's at the same time. And I took with me my experience of watching individuals share their experience, share their lived experience. And I stopped calling them stories at that time, because those who are listening to us, who are not part of our community, don't understand when we say story, what story means. When we hear story, we know sit down and listen. When non-Native people hear story, they may not see it as the depth that we understand it, a story to be. So I started calling them testimonies, because these experiences were direct result of policy of the United States government, boarding school and adoption. So they offer, and so that elevated the experience of the person who was sharing. And it was hard sometimes. I mean, the person sharing, I call it's like emotional vomiting, to just rid your spirit and your body of the tension. This happened and that happened. And what happens as you're sharing your truth? Those around you are validating your experience. We can offer water. We can sing a song. We can let them take their time. And once that's out of your body and out of your mind and out of your spirit, and have those medicines take that, and those songs and ceremonies enter into your spirit like a salve, medicating that pain. So that's the truth part. The healing part happens. Valerie said she's cautions the word healing, and I do too. But way back when we were first starting speaking about truth and reconciliation, I would always just say truth and reconciliation, until this grandma in Crow Creek corrected me, and she said, don't ever talk about truth and reconciliation without including a time for healing. In 1999, Governor Rounds declared the state of South Dakota a year of reconciliation. She said, nobody came here to hear what happened to us. So nothing happened. No reconciliation took place here. So I carefully put in there truth, healing, reconciliation. I do not possess any power whatsoever to heal, nor have I ever thought I did. But what I have learned is we are that healing agent to each other as relatives. When we share in that truth and we come together and we're praying and encouraging each other for what happened, that's the healing. And when that happens, I think with understanding what happened, those who are hearing this, if it's open to non-native, so these don't need to be, but we used ours as a way to educate those who make decisions about Indian families. You don't have to do that. But in doing that, if you do that, things are heard in a different way. This is when you can change and address what you heard. In our experience, we watched social workers be dumbfounded because they had been bought into the myth that adoption was a guaranteed safety for children. And we know in our experience that it isn't, that half of those who were placed in non-native homes experienced sexual abuse, physical abuse, racism, and often being the only person of color within their family system. And for people like myself, where I was the only brown girl in a town of about 4,700 plus people, that emotional isolation is crippling. So coming together, having a time of truth, having given ourselves that time of healing, and then the reconciliation part, that is not an event. Reconciliation is not an event. It isn't like, ta-da, now we're done. No, it's like, ta-da, now we're going to start. Now we're going to start with changed relationships based on what we've heard and based on what each person can bring to a solution. Now we're going to do it. We're going to right whatever wrongs we can right, and we're going to add to that and strengthen what will strengthen the community. So in the beginning, there were scoffers, saying to me, Sandy, you can't be opening up people's lives like that and just leave them. But they don't understand that having songs and ceremony and taking care of them is closing them. It's putting the best Band-Aid ever on them to take with them, those validations and the release of what they needed to share that they'd never shared with anyone. So that part is, if it's done in a loving, grounded, centered way with your healers present, or I shouldn't say with your healers, they wouldn't even get mad at me for saying that, your spiritual leaders present, and you're not just opening them up to bleed. And secondly, people were afraid that they shouldn't even speak of it, but that's what they were told. That's the message from boarding school. I will brutalize you. I'll take your body. I'll beat you, but you better not say a word. Not only that, we see that I've heard boarding school experiences where they had to watch someone be brutalized, or they even had to participate in it. So there's been no experience of how we share our hurt, and everyone, instead of ignoring, comes together for that healing. We have that in us. That's in our DNA. That's why we're resilient as a people. And that's why that's part of what was taken from us. That's another thing I want to throw in here really quickly. Another word that around the boarding school language, I want to stop saying we lost our language, we lost our ability to parent. No, we didn't. It was taken from us, systematically and intentionally taken. We can take it back. We can reawaken it. It literally lives within us. We have this in us. And how do I know that? I've seen it. I've experienced in my own life, in my own way. I grew up in a very abusive household, and I was very abusive to my firstborn child. And today, I'm not that way. So we can change the trajectory of our lives through our songs and ceremonies and coming together in a way that's uplifting, encouraging, validating. And if we remember that reconciliation is not an event, it literally is the beginning of how things will be different in the future. Let's see. What else did I want to share? I was so busy watching the clock, Valerie. I got 2 minutes and 20 seconds left. I think I'll just ask me something now.
Oh, Sandy, you're so good about reframing and about healing. And I watching TV. If you're a big fan of talk shows, afternoon talk shows, I'm sure you see the people on the show will be like, and then I had this moment, and I was healed, and I forgave everybody, and from that moment on, my life just opened, and everything got better. And I've always just been like, what are you like? Well, because healing is not it's a moment, but it's a series of moments. It's a lifetime. It's a process.
Healing does not have a timeline. And forgiveness, that's another thing I forgot to mention. Let me write that word down for future talks. Forgiveness. Okay, so I was talking to this elder lady, and her and I were talking about what she had to let go of in her past, of the abuses that had happened to her. And I was talking about mine. And she said, I I was listening to this elder years ago speak, and he was talking about that concept. And finally, somebody asked him, well, how do you say forgiveness? He wasn't really using the word forgiveness, but he was talking about that. And she said, he finally laughed and said, well, there's no word in the Ojibwe language that says to forgive, or I forgave you. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. So I asked my good friend, Jerry Dearly. He's the one who made the song that we use to bring our relatives back in the circle who've been separated through adoption and foster care, and has worked in these circles with me. I said, do we have a word for forgiveness in Lakota? And he said, no, we don't. The closest that we have is compassion. And the reason that it's compassion is, and I remember Chris Leith, who really led me down that brought me into this work, talked about that. He said, for those who've hurt you, you have to pray for them sincerely, for their chozani, for their health, and for their. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do that, because I was pretty solid in that I don't have to forgive to be healthy. I'm sober. I don't hit anybody. I had a little checklist, until I was challenged to do it one time in a situation that I had to. And it changed me. It didn't change the person. Well, they had some changes, actually. They've matured and had some changes. But what you're taught in doing that, I think, which it's each person's different. But what I learned in that process was that everybody comes into a situation with whatever they experienced, either false information, like many social workers had false information about who we are, which is why they made the decisions that they did. The person that hurt me from the time I was a little child on had great issues, mental health issues and personal issues. While it didn't, I don't know how to say it, it just went away. That resentment and that anger and all of that went away. I don't know if that's forgiveness because Jerry said forgiveness is a Christian concept. Jesus forgives your sins and you forgive other people. And he said, we pray for them and what happens as a result is we have compassion then and understand. And in doing that, we can let go. And all I can say is that the people that I know that live in that way of life, it works. Not overnight. Takes a while. I'm pretty salty. It takes me a while. I don't cartwheel into anything. But once I'm there, I want to encourage that, because it was something that lifted a lot from me, and I had plenty to be resentful and angry about.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you for reframing that and for putting it into the context of compassion. That's a really important differentiation to make, and a helpful one, I think.
It is, isn't it? Imagine being told, pray for their Wachozani's, and you're bleeding. You're like, what? So.
And it also goes back to compassion is a nice place to return to over and over.
It's the place to return to. Yes. For your own health.
Yes.
For your own well-being. Yep.
Thank you so much. Levi, did you have a question for Sandy?
Well, someone in the chat just asked what the Ojibwe word for compassion is. Sandy, you have to know?
That I don't know. I'm not Ojibwe, so that I don't have. In fact, the concept about when you continue to pray for the person, because in Lakota it would be more like, if the word would be waushila. It's to have pity for someone. And so I didn't even have any pity for the mother who was so horrible to me at all. And finally, it was just so weird. I mean, I wasn't concentrating and trying to make it happen, but in my praying about it, she's long gone, but in my praying about it in that way, I finally saw her in a pitiful way. And her life was horrible. Her life was unhappy. And I'm blessed and living this life. And I finally started getting it that's why we're told to move in that direction for our own well-being.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sandy. We know that this has been a difficult and challenging conversation for a lot of us. And we're so grateful to all of our speakers today, Sandy, Deb, Eleanor, for just sharing so much with us. We do have a couple of minutes left for questions. If you have more questions, please do put them in the chat. One question that we do have is, how can non-Native people help? And Sandy, if you want to answer, or if anybody, Yufna or Deb, you want to pop back on and address that.
Well, there's many issues that are when local voting comes around, and when the big elections come along. Look and ask your representatives how they vote on the pipelines. Ask them if they know what the Indian Child Welfare Act is, and has anything put before them. Right now with Brackeen v. Holland, that's a major issue. Talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends about, wow, something just made sense to me in a way it never made sense before, and go into that conversation of either why it was uncomfortable or it's still uncomfortable, and talk. You see a public display of individuals forming a protest and their bodies trying to make a statement. Go down and ask. Look for the table with the tent over it and say, how can I help? Do I have, and just put yourself out there and it'll come.
I would add to that please help us support the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding School Policies in the U.S. Act, and that's HR 544 and Senate Bill 2907. So reach out to your legislators, your senators, ask them to support, sign on to the bill. If they already are signed on, thank them and ask them to please continue to share information about the bill so that we can educate our our national leaders on the importance of understanding Indian boarding school policies and the effects they've had on our communities. So I know someone in the chat wrote, it didn't just affect the children of that time period or over the generational span of boarding schools, but it affects us deeply today. So I just wanted to add that, and thank you all for this opportunity.
And Danielle, I did send that link if I check your email, because I'd like to be able to make that available. Pop it in the chat quick if we can.
I think she has. She posted it
Awesome.
while you were speaking, Sandy.
I can't really see my chat for some reason, so thank you. Thank you, thank you.
And she reposted it. Thank you, Danielle. Danielle, behind the scenes producer here with us today. Do we have any more questions? For those of you watching live, do you have other questions that you want to ask? If you do, now is the opportunity to. Also, Deb and Eleanor, if you have any final thoughts, you too, Sandy, that you want to share or leave people with before we sign off, please, let's share them now.
I want to thank everyone for being here again. I'll remember to use your voice, even in coffee conversation. Write down those bills, as Deb did share, but also look and know that anything that impacts Indian people will eventually impact you.
We're all connected.
Yep.
And again, I want to thank Native News Online and everyone who has joined us here today to just remember to, to hold that space, to listen as gently as we can and be there for one another. It takes all of us. It takes, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike to find that healing and to find that space. So be gentle with yourselves and be gentle with others, because as our president Whitehawk has stated, you don't know what that person has experienced. You don't know how deep that generational pain is within a person, or when it will come up for you or someone that you love. So be gentle with yourself and others.
And this is Levi Rickert, the editor of Native News Online. I want to report that our third segment on the Indian boarding school discussion will happen sometime in April, a yet to be determined date, because we actually want to report out on the report that's going to come from Secretary Holland's office, the U.S. Department of the Interior, on the Indian boarding school, on the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative. So we will have another live stream, and some of these same guests may be invited back to make comments. It's a very important issue, and I was looking at some of the comments, and people are thanking us, but it's what we're all in this together. And I want to say that as the publisher of Native News Online, we need to have a voice that amplifies this so that the non-native media will also report on it. And media tends to kind of go after the shiny object. Last summer it was the shiny object, but we're going to keep it to the forefront. And it's very important, as Deb was mentioning, getting with the congressional reps, your senators, to get that legislation, and that is so critical to this work. So thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Eleanor, if you'd like to add anything, I think, Eleanor, why don't you just turn your camera on? I know you have a couple things you want to share with us. Can you turn your camera on and join us back on? Thank you so much. Before we close, we're going to hear a few more words from Eleanor.
I'd like to thank everyone as well. Mom has been trying to do this for all these years, and to hear people now say, now is the time to hear. I wish she was here to hear those words, that she struggled and worked hard to get the word out, but we weren't ready. And now we're ready, and she's watching us from somewhere to say, good job, guys, just keep it up. We're not the only family, and for such a long time, we did feel like we were the only family. And just support each other and love each other and take care, and I'll keep you updated on what the Army is doing or not doing. Thank you.
Eleanor, I want to say a big Wopi Latanka, a big thank you from my heart. Thank you for keeping that door open for those when we were ready to walk through that door.
Thank you for walking through the door.
Wow, thank you. Thank you all so much for sharing with us today. Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Deb. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you to all of your ancestors who are here with us today as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
And to those of you who watched from home, thank you for joining us. We will have this on our YouTube and you'll be able to watch it again there. If you'd like to learn more about the issue of Indian boarding schools, please visit our website. It's nativenewsonline.net, and sign up for our newsletter so you can stay informed on the issue, on the ongoing issue of Indian boarding schools. We'd also, again, like to thank our sponsors, the Platinum presenting sponsor, Tunica Biloxi Tribe of Louisiana, the Gold sponsor, Yahoo, and the Silver sponsor, Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation. Again, you can follow us on social, subscribe to our YouTube channel, check our website, nativenewsonline.net, and we will keep you informed of our next boarding school webinar, which is scheduled for April of 2022. We'd also like to thank our producers, Danielle Kramer. I know your name, Danielle. Danielle Kramer, Dan Salas, Jenna Coons, Kristen Lilia, Brian Edwards, and of course, Levi Rickert, all of our wonderful speakers today, and to everyone who made this presentation possible. And we especially thank you, our audience, for caring about this issue so much and joining us on this journey.